Hello and welcome to this edition of Office Hours with the Practical Prof and Friends. So, I have been really fortunate to be able to talk with folks that are friends of mine from all walks of life. And, it never amazes me what they're able to do, what they're capable of doing because of their passion or because of their commitment. And this episode is going to be right up there with that. Really proud and happy to have back with us my friend Kyle Ruffin, and to talk to her about her new book, which is called In Stroke's Shadow, My Caregiver Story. So Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Santo.
My pleasure. So I'm going to show the book and it might not come off. There we go. If I do it slowly, it comes on because of our backgrounds. But what a labor of love! What a wonderful story. So a couple years ago, we talked about you writing this book, and now here it is, published, and I just am so excited to talk to you about it. So the one thing I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to read something from it, um, which I think any caregivers out there will share. You and I have talked about my caregiving story, and yours is quite different, but there's so many things that resonate, and I know that your book will resonate with so many people. Um, this is a difficult
You
story, right, for
basically
you
are
to write?
reliving it as you're writing it because
Absolutely.
you're trying to be as accurate and as interesting as you can be. So there were times when I was writing it when I was actually feeling the emotions that I felt at the moment. So, yes, very difficult.
And you reveal a real authentic relationship with your parents and with your family, and that's also a different side of caregiving. We might say, well, it's easy to caregive for people that everything's roses and lollipops, but you know you did this because this is what you do. Here's this excerpt I wanted to read. This is from Kyle's book. I learned to accept her domineering behavior. She was my mother, and I didn't feel I had a choice. I kept her at a distance so I could do my life my way. But that distance has now closed to the point where we were overlapping. In the space of a day, I had become the voice she lost, the protector she needed, the advocate her new situation required, and more. We were undeniably connected in ways we'd never been before. That's a that's quite a threshold to cross.
It is. And in the case of my mom, she suffered a major stroke at the age of 68. And as a result, she lost the ability to use her uh, right side entirely. So she had no right hand, or so she couldn't write. She couldn't walk, and she also developed a condition called aphasia. And aphasia is described as, you know what words you want to come out of your mouth, but they don't seem to make it out. And a lot of times it comes out as just gobbledygook. So she could not communicate at all. And that's what I mean by that. I had to become her voice. And I had to make sure that she was getting the care that she needed. And sometimes, because we were so different in our natures, what I communicated wasn't necessarily what she would have wanted me to communicate with the doctors and the other professional carers that were in our universe as a result of the stroke. But years, decades of her being my mother, I was able to communicate or understand uh, when she was mad at me or when I was communicating her actual wishes, because it's amazing how much you actually get to know about how your parents react to things just by being with them so much.
Yeah, I get it. It's funny. Well, I don't know, funny, ironic. You refer to her as mommy throughout the entire book, as you called her as an adult. Yes,
Absolutely.
and so many ways, as we know with family caregiving, you were the mommy.
You do become that, and maybe not entirely, but
Mhm.
you certainly do make some of the basic decisions that a mother would make for a child when the parent is completely incapacitated. Um, but the nature of our relationship, that authority figure who she had always been in my life, that was constant. So yes, she was mommy. If I called her by her first name, it was never in her presence. um, it was just who we were as mother and daughter,
Yeah.
and that seemed natural to me. It's funny, when I first started writing the book, I would refer to her as Paula, and I'd go back and forth between Paula and mommy and Paula and mommy. And some of the people that were helping me craft this story were like, no, just call her mommy, because that does represent our relationship. Even though I was, in my late 50s when I was going through all of this, that was our relationship.
And it was also very indicative of how um, how deferent you were, respectful you were, um, which, as you say in various parts of the book, was really hard sometimes to swallow that. I like the metaphor that you created about um, caregiving. I think the first time I remember seeing it was in maybe chapter 9, about a man swimming in the ocean parallel to the shoreline. You want to describe
Yes.
that?
Well, so I was on a beach one day, and I was watching a gentleman swim back and forth parallel to the shore, and the water was pretty rough. And each time a wave would approach him from what for me was behind him, uh, it looked like it was going to take him over and just crash him like to the ground. That there was no way he would be able to survive. And instead, what happened was his body just lifted and lowered with each wave. He didn't panic. He didn't do anything but continue to swim parallel to the shore, back and forth, time and time again. And for me, caregiving was like that. It was like the the oncoming crisis always felt like it was going to be way too much for me to handle. Like there's just no way I could ever do that. If you had asked me in advance whether or not I would be able to do some of the things that I did for my mother, I would have unequivocally said no. But when you're in the moment, you do what has to be done, and you get through it, and you are lucky enough sometimes to experience some times of calm, but then something else comes up. Just like waves always continue to come toward the shore, there's always going to be some situation that you have to respond and react to. So that was something that I survived, thank goodness, and something that, quite honestly, I think a lot of caregivers uh, surprise themselves when it comes to how they're able to handle some of the challenges that come their way.
You mentioned a little, maybe a little more than halfway through the book, what I wrote down as kind of a pre-death mourning, and this is really struck me. You say it was around that time that I had a sudden realization that I was in mourning. It hit me while I was driving that familiar route to her house. Like a bolt of lightning, I instantly understood that my mother, the woman I knew all my life, was gone. She wasn't dead, but the person she used to be was. So we lose them in bits and pieces?
I think we do. We lose them in bits and pieces, and we don't realize it. You know, even if my mother had recovered 100% and was living independently again, and I had, you know, not the regular daily responsibilities that I had come to take on, I would never stop worrying about her. This is an experience that changes the dynamics between mother and child, uh, like irreparably. Like, and the moment that I was able to come to terms with the fact that I was in mourning, because it's a like you have this feeling that you don't quite understand. And you know, it maybe feels like depression, it may feel like just uh, anxiety. But when I was able to come to terms with the fact that I was in mourning and that my mother would never be the same person that I had known up until her first stroke, I was able to let go of expectations that she would. And carrying those expectations were an extra weight that I was able to drop and say, you know what, let's just deal with her who she is now, not who she used to be, who you're trying to get her back to. Let's just deal with today. And that was such a wonderful relief that I just didn't expect.
It it's our work, right? It's the work of the caregiver to actually adjust the expectations. And you're right, it's a relief, but there's I would you say there's a sadness to it, kind of a grieving?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, grieving is there's steps that you go through with grieving, right? And there eh, whether you're grieving someone who is living or someone who has passed on, they're kind of the same steps. And it's really adjusting to the new reality. So yes, there was grief, there was sadness, there was sadness in knowing that, you know, that the past that I knew and had grown accustomed to was gone, and that my mother was suffering in a way she had never suffered before. Yeah, there's a lot to process. There's a lot to process, and that our relationship was completely different. It was completely different, and it wasn't necessarily a relationship that in some ways, it was one I sought after, but in a lot of ways, it wasn't one I sought. We weren't very close. I mean, I say that, but you know, it's all relative, right? How close you are to your family. Um, but we weren't like besties, and we didn't hang out together, not a lot. And so I wasn't really looking for that kind of relationship. By that time in my life, I had my own uh, friends and things that I enjoyed doing. Um, but I also got a mother who began towards the end to show me some appreciation, which she really hadn't done before. My mother wasn't very emotive, and she wasn't the kind of mother who told me she loved me or that she appreciated me. A lot of times I would hear that my mother was proud of me from her friends. She would never actually utter those words to me. And um, I did end up having a mother who expressed those things, even through her aphasia. She was able to communicate to me that she was grateful for the way I was caring for her, and that she loved me, and that she was proud of me, and appreciated uh, my ability to navigate the system on her behalf.
I don't know that I met your mom. I mean, we've known each other for so long, but I certainly met your mom through this book. Um, and she was a piece of work, right? She was, you have to tell the story of when you were working for United Way and she kind of popped in? Because oh my goodness, I can still see this happening.
I mean, all my career, I've been like a bit of a workaholic. And I was the vice president of marketing and communications for United Way in Camden County, New Jersey. And I was sitting in a leadership meeting with the other vice presidents and the president. And we were going through our weekly list of things. And I was, commanding and doing all the things that one does as a vice president. And suddenly the door swung open and my mother walked in. And my mother's not one to visit me at work. She knows that there's there's a line between work and family for me. And she walked in and she just looked at me and said, "What time are you leaving for dinner?" And I was like, dinner? Like, I haven't even thought about dinner. It's like 4:30. I'm usually the last one. I'm shutting the lights off here. I'm not ready for dinner. But then like I had an out of body experience where like, okay, I see myself, I'm standing up, I'm walking over to my office, and I'm really doing this, and shutting down my computer, shutting off my lights, and I'm following my mother out the door. And suddenly I was no longer the vice president of this organization. I was this little child who was like following her Svengali out the door from work. And that's just the kind of power she held over me. Now, this obviously was pre-stroke, but that's the kind of power she held over me. And, that goes back to, why'd you call her mommy? Because that was that was our dynamic. She was the authority. I was the child. No matter what I achieved, no matter how old I got, I was always the child. I was always the child, and still, I'm still the child. So that's something that one still has to, caregiving is not done in a vacuum, right? It's done within the context of a relationship. And each of us brings a different relationship to our caregiving experience, but we can't ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. We can't suddenly drop all of the baggage and be like, okay, now I'm 100% here for you. That baggage is following you everywhere you go. And there were times when, even though my mother was not well, that we got into fights and we got into arguments. And in the end, I did what I always did. I apologized and I came back and I, made sure she was okay. But our history was present in our dynamics when I became her caregiver. And that's normal. That's okay.
Let me just read to you. I wrote a little bit of a commentary on this for you, but this read, it was so easy to read and so authentic. But there's one spot that I wrote. It says, "Yet because of her sense of obligation and her unconditional love that is characteristic of most family caregivers, a mother-daughter relationship was transformed, and peace for the author and the relationship with the mother finally became possible." When did you get the sense that that was a possibility?
I think it's set in most when I made the very difficult decision to place her in an assisted living facility. That was something that she had made very clear throughout my entire life that that was not something she wanted. And she had been in and out of them over the nearly 3-year period from the beginning of the stroke. And the marketing person at the facility said to me, this is your opportunity to just be, mother and daughter and not be caregiver. And I said, that's not possible. Like, that's just like, really? Is that an option? I don't believe you. But then it became pretty clear that after she ended up having a total of three, but after the second stroke, she was not going to be able to come back to the point where she could even come live with me, because she was just so disabled and would require pretty much round the clock attention and care. So I agreed to have her placed permanently in a lovely facility here in Morristown. And after I did, yeah, we became kind of more like companions and friends. I would visit a lot, because they say, if you don't visit, that staff in nursing homes and facilities aren't as attentive as if you do visit a lot. But at the same time, she was alone, and I wanted to make sure that I was there with her as much as I could be. So I made it a point to get there every other day. We'd sit together and watch TV. I'd do puzzles. I'd do her nails. I'd do her hair. Um, Sometimes we would go out, but no longer was I worried about having to take care of her basic needs. Her activities of daily living were all taken care of by staff, and she and I could just enjoy each other's company. And that was a nice transition, and she took to it way better than I thought she would. She told me she would, like, that was not an option, and when I told her that that was going to be the case, she never even objected in the slightest. Um, I also thought that her friends would judge me harshly for making that decision. And surprisingly, they were all on my side, and were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you did that, because this is a lot. You really needed to be able to do that." Um, and that was a weight off.
You did something that many caregivers don't do. And it's really important. You start taking care of yourself. And self-care is kind of the fuel that keeps caregivers going. Because sure, she was taking care of all the basics, but you were there still all the time, whenever you needed to be. But that's an amazing gift that you give yourself in order to keep going. And I mean, you did it with a couple of trips that I just, I could not get over. Taking these trips and checking in. And why don't you tell us the one, I think it was Canada? Was it Canada?
Yeah, the trip I took, well, early on, one of my mother's friends told me that she wanted the opportunity to spend time with my mother, because she lived out of town, and she didn't just want to come and visit. She wanted to take care of her and let me go on a vacation. So at first I said, "Ugh, this is, that's impossible." And then I agreed to do it. So I started planning, and my husband and I, for years, have gone to the Montreal Jazz Festival every other year. And we were excited because we were now going to be able to go. And I was going to, we both needed some time away. She was living with us at the time, and the friend came and took her back to her house after I'd set everything up. And I tried to tell the friend everything that I could think of to prepare her for what her span as as a caregiver was going to be like. And we went off on our vacation, and about 3 days in, I get a call. Now I'm calling my mother every day, and I'm speaking to my mother, but I wasn't calling her friend. Um, so I figure I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. My mother's the one I care about. So I get a call from my mother's friend, who tells me that she's on the front porch. The friend, I'm on the front porch. My bags are packed, and I'm leaving. Now, she lived in New Mexico. You're leaving? Like, I'm in another country, and you're leaving my mother alone? Like, that's not even possible. And fortunately, my mom was still getting in-home therapy and different services. So the people who were scheduled to see her that day called me, and we arranged for um, uh, her friends to come in and do 8-hour shifts with my mom until I returned. So that was like a Tuesday, and I was able to do my vacation until Saturday. And when I came back, and we went back to normal. And honestly, my husband was a real uh, catalyst for me sticking out the vacation and not coming home, because he was not having any of it. And this was his vacation too. He was not going to give it up for my mother. So even though I was angry as heck at him because of his like sort of not letting go and really digging in, it forced me to have a full vacation. So I would check in every 8 hours with whoever was the new person on call, and my mother survived it. She was fine, and I was fine, and we moved on.
Um, one of the last things before we end, and it's a difficult thing, is the choice that you had to make towards your mom, the end of your mom's life, had to be just an incredibly difficult. And so, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, she I was going to scale back my visiting to her. And so one Friday I was there, and I said, look, I'm not going to come at all on the weekends, because I would always come at least one day on the weekend. I said, I'm not coming on the weekends. I'm going to try to have full weekends to myself and my husband. And she seemed disappointed, but but I had to make that decision for me and for my husband. I mean, it wasn't just me. I, I'm a part of a couple that we choose to be together, so let's be together. Um, and that Saturday night, overnight into Sunday, I got a call saying that they were unable to wake her, and they rushed her to the hospital. I met them there, and she, over the next 3 days, they determined that she had suffered a third stroke. And over the next 3 days, she never regained consciousness. And I had to make the decision to remove the life support system from her. And it's funny. You think those moments are going to be like poetic, or some made-for-TV movie. Um, but and we did our best to make it that. We had friends and family around, and we were all holding hands in a circle around her bed when they removed the breathing tube, and people were praying, and we were kind of heads bowed, um, and for about the next hour, things beeped and beeped and beeped. And the circle started to shrink, and people started to go home for dinner, and it was kind of over. And my mother managed to stay with us for 18 hours. So I slept in the hospital room, not for my first time. And the next morning she passed. And it was, for me, the first time I'd ever been in the same room with somebody as they left this world. And it's surreal, you know. But I'm glad that I was there with her. I'm glad I was there, and I was touching her as she left. Um, and it marked kind of the end of a period that will define me for the rest of my life. That nearly 3 years of being her constant companion has had a indelible impact on who I am and who I will be forever.
And you can look back on that, no regrets?
No regrets. And as you read in the book, I had regrets with my dad and with my sister, but with
Yeah.
my mother, none. And no regrets.
It's a good feeling, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that this book has like brought you through in ways maybe that you wouldn't have taken the journey yourself. But the fact that you're sharing it with us is really a gift to everyone who reads this. Um, I want to encourage everyone, you can buy it everywhere books are sold, right? Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
You can get, yes, it's available online. And different places where it's available are on my website, mycaregiverstory.com. So check there. There's even some local bookstores that are carrying it on their websites. They might not have it in on the shelves, but they have it on their websites. So if you choose to buy local, there's an option.
And I also think it's important for people to know that you're doing other things with the book. You're inciting conversations. You're uh, which is such an amazing gift. Again, because I think sometimes just people want to talk about it. I mean, I want them to read it. I think it's a great read, and I think it's a wonderful story. And I think that then it incites conversations that maybe people would never have. Have you seen
I
that?
absolutely. I mean, that was one of the main reasons I wrote it. Not because I just needed to tell my story or that I needed the therapy, but when I have had and other people have read it, and we will talk about it for like a couple of minutes, but then they will launch into their own caregiving experience and in ways that they've not processed before. People I don't think feel like they have permission to talk about caregiving. It's something that you're supposed to do and be grateful, and that anything that you feel that might be negative is a flaw on your part. But that's not true. And what this book does is it gives people permission to talk to anyone who cares, um, and will listen about their experience, because talking about it is therapy. So I wanted this book to be a catalyst for people talking about their caregiving experience. This is not a manual. This isn't instructive. This isn't, hey, here's how you care for your uh, parent after they've gone through X. This is one person's story that gives others permission to tell their stories. And I've found that to be absolutely the case for anybody who's read it.
It I can't agree enough. It will definitely be that. And as one who has been there in those shoes, thank you for writing it. Thank you for sharing it. And thank you for being so honest and candid and authentic. Um, like the Hollywood thing, yeah, that's great. Everyone makes a movie and it's got a little conflict here and there, but like you just write real, and it's I can't say it's a fun read, but I can say it's an engaging read. I read it in like two or three sit downs. I'm like, and I'm not a voracious reader. I'm my profession, all I did was read, right? So like, "Ah, I gotta read a book. Okay. I know it's Kyle and I love Kyle, but I gotta read a book." But I'm telling you, I went boom, 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 boom.
Who would have thought caregiving could be a page turner?
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I think it's just full of emotion that are real, that we can all relate to, especially if you're a caregiver. You can absolutely relate to it. And my story is not unique, but it's
Well,
one that we often, people going through it, suffer in silence.
and I'll tell you, um, I learned about the intersection of Black culture and caregiving and family dynamics in ways that I wouldn't have known, because I'm surrounded by Italians, and I know what load that adds to the whole dynamic. It's different. There's some nuances, but there's a lot of stuff that's like, oh my gosh, like what will people think? And you don't, I could hear my mom saying the same thing, like, what are you telling them that for? That's none of their business. Don't be talking about that. And then if I told the doctor something she didn't want to know, what she got, the dagger eyes would come out, and I'm like, oh well, it's for your benefit, mom.
Right. Absolutely. And that's hard for a child to navigate. It's really hard for a child to navigate because in what we're trying to do is to help them, um, and help ourselves. Because as I said, if I don't tell the doctor something, and this could have been the thing that brought her back, then we've all failed. Um,
Regardless of the role changes, we are always the child and they are always the mommy.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Kyle. What a pleasure. I encourage everyone to go out and look for this and buy this book, In Stroke's Shadow, My Caregiver Story, written by Kyle Ruffin. Kyle, thanks so much for being with us.
Sandy, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it and appreciate you.
My pleasure. This has been Office Hours with the Practical Prof and friends. Thanks for tuning in. We'll look forward to our next episode.